Good morning. My name is Melinda Herring, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us for a conversation with Dr. Anders Åslund on the making of Putin's Russia. Dr. Åslund is, of course, a senior resident fellow at the Eurasia Center, and he also teaches at Georgetown University, where I was privileged to be a student 10 years ago. So this is really a special meeting for me as well. Dr. Åslund is, of course, the leading authority on economic policy in Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. We're lucky to have someone who had a front row seat during some of Russia's most tumultuous history in the 90s and even before. He was a Swedish diplomat in Moscow from 1984 to 1987. From 1991 to 1994, Dr. Åslund was an advisor to acting Prime Minister Gaidar, along with Dr. Jeffrey Sachs. Dr. Åslund is prolific and has written more than a dozen books, including his latest one is called Russia's Crony Capitalism. He's also written How Capitalism Was Built, which is excellent right here, it's purple. He's also written Russia's Capitalist Revolution and How Russia Became a Market Economy. Now, we have an hour together today, and we're going to have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and then we want to bring you in. This is an opportunity to ask him your hardest questions. I think this period in Russia's history is absolutely fascinating. He's up for anything. So if you would like to ask him a question, you can type it in the Q&A, or you can send it to us on Twitter, and please use the hashtag #RussiaFactor. So Anders, welcome. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. I'd like to ask you to set the scene. In your book, How Capitalism Was Built, you talk about how oligarchs are the most hated people in Russia. Is that still true today? And you also say that oligarchs are not unique to Russia, that they're persistent throughout the world. So just give us a 10,000-foot overview. How do oligarchs look in Russia today?
Well, if I start when they came up, you can say that from 1988, the people who became oligarchs became real businessmen. And the term was used from 94. And the high period of the oligarchs was from 94 until the 2000. And what was peculiar of the Russian oligarchs was that they seemed to be dominant in Russian society, that the state served them rather than they serving the state. And then gradually Putin took over. During his first term, 2000 to 2003, there was a balance. In terms of economic policy, this was the best period for Russia's economy. And with the Yukos confiscation from 2003 and the arrest of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the richest and most independent man in Russia, the oligarchs have gradually become servants of not the state, but of the top KGB or now FSB people. So Putin has taken control, and you can say that today there are no real oligarchs in the old sense. The United States today is much more an oligarchy than Russia is today. Russia today is much more a corrupt police state, an authoritarian kleptocracy. So I think it's wrong to call Russia today an oligarchy, and we shouldn't really call the oligarchs as they are called today oligarchs, but rather servants of Putin or survivors of a prior system. Most countries in the world are oligarchies because normally you have massive economies of scale and you have big concentration of wealth because corporate governance is not very good in most places. So traditionally, United Kingdom and the United States used to be the exceptions, but today, of course, the United States is an oligarchy.
Well, that's a lot to draw out. Thank you, Anders. Let's back up to the 90s. How did the oligarchs make their money? If you're willing to consider them oligarchs, then go back and tell us that story, please.
Yeah, the oligarchs initially were young men. Literally all of them were men. The legal basis for their activity was the law on cooperatives of May 1988, which effectively allowed private enterprises. And initially, they did one thing, arbitrage. They sold, they bought cheaply and sold expensively, and it was very much involved with foreign trade. To begin with, most of them, almost all, imported computers, and then they sold them for many times the price at home. And soon they started exporting commodities. You could become a multimillionaire on one transportation, one ship of oil. And that's where we have a big fortune that they came up early on. And this is from 1989, 90, that for really smart people with good connection could make money. But generally, they were opportunistic traders and private equity traders rather than industrialists. Later on, they made the money as bankers. From 92 to 98, oligarch was almost a synonym of banker. But then in 98, most of the oligarchic banks, almost all of them, went under in bankruptcy. And after that, the people who survived were those who had transferred their assets into commodity production. So from 2000, the oligarchs made their money from commodity production. Oil and metals were the big things. And it just shows how they have moved from traders to bankers to industrialists. And then eventually they have sold off much of their enterprises. There are few people who stick to the enterprises they had from the beginning.
Anders, can you give us some names? So this first generation you're talking about with the Soviet law on cooperatives, you wrote that they were mostly engineers. A lot of them came from humble backgrounds from the provinces. At the beginning, they were Jewish, and then that changed. Who were the big names in that first period where they were doing the importing the computers?
Well, we are talking about Bankirshina, the 7 bankers who were famous from 94 to 96 to met together. And the central figure was Boris Berezovsky, who was an outstanding mathematician. Number 2, I would say Vladimir Kosinski, who built up a very entrepreneurial media empire. I would argue the best media that Russia has ever had. And then it was more bankers, Mikhail Friedman, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Alexander Smolensky, Pyotr Aven, and Vladimir Potanin. So these were the 7 big oligarchs. And among these, all but Potanin were Jewish.
And are there any survivors in this original crew? Did any of these guys manage to change? You talked about the different waves of oligarchs that we've seen. Have any of them survived? Are any of them still in business?
Well, there are 3 of these who are still in business. Vladimir Potanin, who got Norilsk nickel in 95, who's still doing that, and Mikhail Friedman and Pyotr Aven with Alpha Group, which is today the biggest private group in Russia. But they have wisely moved the most of their assets out of Russia. And they made the money then on TNK, the oil company, on Alpha Bank, that they still have, 2 big retail chains, and Wimpelcom, the mobile phone company. So they have been focused on 4 industries in Russia.
Got it. And I know we've talked about this before, but I love Hoffman's book called The Oligarchs. Is there another book that you would recommend on this period for people who want to do more reading about this original crew of 7?
Well, there are 2 excellent books. I think that Chrystia Freeland's book, Sale of the Century, is a notch better. David Hoffman had the problem that her book was already out in 2000 when he wrote his, and it was published in 2002. But both books are really excellent, and head and shoulder above other books. And today you can't write these very personal books any longer because you would be sued for libel by one person or the other. So the freedom in the West, in the US and the UK, about writing about these topics has been sharply reduced.
Wow. So it makes it impossible to do sort of any scholarly or investigative work on Russian oligarchs today.
Yeah, you can see that the serious newspapers like Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal hardly write about oligarchs any longer. And if they do it, it's some ridiculous puff story, but you understand that this is not serious.
Anders, another thing that I noticed in your book, How Capitalism Was Built, you talked about how Russian oligarchs have tight circles of trust. I know that was true in the 90s. Is that still true today?
It has actually changed substantially. If you take, for example, the Yuko Circle, which is typical, it was a group of, I guess, 7 young men who knew each other from college, and they trusted each other, and they hang together. Today, it's much more family empires. Everybody takes care of their children, and it's much more each big businessman for himself and his family. So it has been a big transformation from a collegial group to a family empire.
Interesting. And when did you see that change? Is that in the 2000s, or is that when would you mark that change?
Well, you can say when the kids started growing up. So it's in the 2000s.
Okay. And you talked us through who the oligarchs were and the various waves. Talk about, what do you call the present wave? You call them servants, Putin's servants? What's your category for them?
Yeah, I would put them in 4 different groups. First, we have Yeltsin oligarchs that I mentioned, the main people. Then you have quite an interesting group who came through really with 1998. It's Oleg Deripaska, Roman Abramovich, Andrei Melnichenko, Sergei Popov, who were very bright, all engineers, and all pretty ruthless and prepared to do what it took. So you can say that this second group were a bit more ruthless than the first group. And the outstanding person here is, of course, Roman Abramovich. Somebody said about him that Roman Abramovich is like a chair that adjusts to your body. You just sit down on him and he knows how to make you comfortable. So he was considered the cashier of a Yeltsin family, and he is considered the cashier of Putin as well. So he is a man who knows how to do services. I don't think that he has made any publicized real political statement ever, although he was governor of Chukotka in the northeast for 8 years. And he lives in an extraordinary luxury with a 767, Boeing 767, which he just in case has painted in gold, and then with 4 of the biggest super yachts in the world, so that people can't confuse him.
Thank you for those details. I was hoping you would tell some stories. Talk to me about what's the relationship between the oligarchs and the state and law enforcement. What does that look like today?
Yeah, sorry, I should go. So then you have a third group of oligarchs who are not really oligarchs at all, but Putin's corrupt cronies, all sanctioned by the United States, the brothers Arkady, Boris Rosenberg, Gennady Timchenko, and Yuri Kovalchuk. These are the people who know how to take out money from Gazprom to offshore places for themselves and in all probability to Putin. And then we have a 4th group who are not oligarchs at all, but the heads of state companies. And the 3 top people there are Igor Sechin of Rosneft and Alexei Miller of Gazprom and Sergei Chemysov of of Rostec, Russian technology, the big armament company with more than 700 companies. And while the Rotenberg, Timchenko, Kovalchuk group, they are businessmen that Putin knew from St. Petersburg early on. Alexei Miller and Igor Sechin were his servant, assistants in St. Petersburg.
Okay, great. So talk to us now about these the waves you've just outlined. What's the relationship to the state and law enforcement today, please?
Yeah, I recently read in a book that KGB created the oligarchy, which is patently untrue. The real relationship is that in the 1990s, the big oligarchs, Khodorkovsky and Gusinski, they had one former deputy KGB chief as head of their counterintelligence, and a deputy minister of interior as head of their security. So the KGB people served the oligarchs. From the early 2000s, this balance changed, or it's really from the arrest of Khodorkovsky in 2003. Then it turned the other way around. The oligarchs had to give services to Putin and his people. And in the early 2000s, I heard from a couple of oligarchs, they were shocked. They had been called to the Kremlin and been forced to give a few tens of millions of dollars. And this was not what they expected when they came to the Kremlin. They were very surprised. Carefully, they didn't say who extorted the money from them, but it was clear that if they didn't pay, they would lose their enterprises. And now we have a situation where law enforcement, particularly FSB, which is all dominant, the old KGB, has started a massive extortion machinery. And if people don't give the money, then they are subject to corporate raiding. All the time, tens of thousands of Russian businessmen are sitting in pre-trial detention. Like, for example, the American big private equity investor, Michael Calvi, for no legal reason whatsoever, just because they are subject to raiding. And if they don't give up their assets, okay, then they can sit there.
What are the percentages that are expected? Do you know?
It was one KGB group, FSB group, that was actually being imprisoned now, 3 colonels of the FSB, and they had been charging, I don't recall the amount, but it was a transaction fee. I think it was 0.1%, but on all transactions, which becomes a lot of money. But the point is that they were considered to be too greedy. They went out of line. They charged more money than they had rank for. So therefore, they were being arrested. Well, nothing happened to, say, the 20 top people around Putin. They are allowed to do absolutely everything.
Anders, Paul Nyland wants you to expand a little bit on the question that I just asked. He'd like you to talk about the relationship between the oligarchs and organized crime. Is there still a relationship there today, or is that something in the past?
It's, of course, quite complicated. You can say that from the beginning, organized crime and the KGB lived together. So if we go back to the 1980s, you had certain illegal activities, and they were typically black exchange of currency and prostitution. And they were always run with the consent of the KGB. So these were KGB connected activities. The new oligarchs had nothing to do with this. They broke out of it. And you can say that there were 2 groups of businesses that broke out, the oligarchs and certain state activities that were connected with law enforcement, armament industry, and so forth. So if you take Vladimir Kosinski, I asked him sometime in the mid-90s, how many people of yours are working in security? And he said 8%. And I think that this was a pretty standard that a normal oligarch broke out. So if you take racketeering in 93, 94, charge 20% of the turnover for traders, I mean the retail trade in Moscow and also other businesses. If you wanted to get out of that, how did you do it? You built up your own security. So I would argue that the oligarchs, the Yeltsin oligarchs, broke up organized crime. And this is very well described in Vadim Volkov's book about violent entrepreneurs. The big thing that happened was that private security was allowed from 92 in Russia. So the 1990s was a period of big clean up of crime. And the oligarchs played an important role in this. Another part was that the state was coming back and the judicial reforms that gradually took place. William Pomeranz has described that very well in his recent book about Russian legal development. So the 1990s is very much misunderstood. It was a period of cleanup. The irony is that the height of this was in Putin's judicial reform of 2002, which was basically very good, but it has one major flaw. The judges were no longer appointed by the regional governors, but by the presidential administration. And through the Yukos confiscation, we know what that really meant, that Putin and the FSB had taken control over the judiciary.
Is that your answer to what went wrong in the 90s? Why Russia didn't make that real transition to a free market democratic system?
Well, there were many things that went wrong. The situation was catastrophic in every sense. In the late, from I would say from October 1990, it was clear that everything would collapse then. And in a massive financial crisis, you don't expect things to be solved. But concretely, what I think went wrong, first of all, Yeltsin should have disbanded the KGB, as in particular Estonia did. That's the way to get clarity. Second, he should have organized parliamentary elections early on. But what Yeltsin argued is that there were two things that had to be done first. To divide the Soviet Union because it was not a sustainable entity, and to focus on the economy. And it turned out that it couldn't focus on the economy without a political base, and then break up the ruble zone and get control over the central bank. The reformers never had control over the central bank in Russia. And you can say from these three things, the rest follow. If you look upon it from another perspective, Russia had massive budget deficits throughout the 1990s, and they led to the financial crash in 98, for which the reformers are blamed. While the problem was that they never had the political power to cut the fiscal deficit. So later on, it's the fiscal deficit, but it's these three original things: not break up the KGB, not have early parliamentary elections, and to break up the ruble zone too late.
Great. Thank you, Anders. I have one more question that I'm going to bring in our audience, and there's a lot of questions in the queue, so thank you very much. Please keep them coming. If you're on Twitter, you can send us questions. If you want to ask Dr. Åslund anything, please use hashtag RussiaFactor. Anders, I know that recently you've spent a lot of time thinking about Russian money, which you noted is in Europe and in the United States. A lot of Russian money has migrated to safer places. what should the U.S. and the EU and European governments be doing to bring greater scrutiny to this money? Are our current laws adequate? What would you do differently if you were advising Congress?
Yeah, the total amount of Russian private money abroad is 800 billion to $1 trillion approximately. And this is money that has, this is the net capital outflow that has been 30 to 40 billion dollars a year. And previously, I, for example, have been rather benign towards this and thinking that it's private money and people simply want to have a safe bank abroad. But now it's quite clear that a large share of this is Putin's money and his group. My guess would be that it's about 1/4 of this money, say $250 billion or so. And this belongs to then these not so gentlemen, Putin, Rosenberg, Kovalchuk, and Timchenko, enormous fortunes. And they can deploy these for political purpose. Why do they need so much money? Because they have to show that they are richer and therefore more powerful than everybody else. Otherwise, they would lose the power. And the money is not safe in Russia, so they need to keep it abroad. So if the West can simply do one simple thing, demand full transparency of ownership, a lot of this would be cleaned up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There's a question from Boris. He says, given the internal dynamics and forces active in Russia in the 1990s, is there anything the West could have done differently to change the situation in Russia?
There was one period of 5 months when the West really mattered. From end of October 91, when Putin made his greatest speech, Yeltsin made his greatest speech ever for democracy, freedom, and the cooperation with the West, until the 1st of April, when Yeltsin lost, 92, when Yeltsin lost control over the parliament. That's when the West should have come in with a big package of $25 billion. I appreciated what Bill Clinton and Strobe Talbot tried to do in the 1990s, but I also thought at the time and now that it was unrealistic. They couldn't make the difference. The train had already passed.
And what would that money have been used for, Anders, specifically?
Stabilization.
Okay.
Russia had hyperinflation of 2,500% in 92, which is a terrible situation, and it's completely demoralizing. And now the Russian reformers who were fighting against the hyperinflation are being blamed for it, and not the communists who had left Russia with a budget deficit that was about 1/3 of GDP in 91.
So your argument is if the West had inserted more at that critical point, it would have reassured ordinary Russians to stick with hard reforms. Is that your argument?
Yeah. So there was a strong group in Russia that wanted to carry out reform, and the West did not provide them with any significant support at all in 92. The West provided food aid rather than reform aid. It did not support the reforms. The IMF did not provide any funding until the fall of 92, when effectively the initial reforms had already failed. And we had hope then, but effectively they never come back. So in historical events, there is a window of opportunity. You can see it when it opens, but you don't know how soon it will close. Normally it closes very fast. Leszek Balcerowicz has written well about that in Poland. In Russia, it lasted 5 months because it was a very difficult situation. And in a difficult situation, you normally make a few mistakes, and a few mistakes are very expensive.
Do you know why the West missed the opportunity? Was it bureaucratic hand-wringing? What was going on in Washington, at the IMF, at the World Bank? Why did we miss the window?
First of all, this was the time when the United States was more powerful than ever. It was one person who was really decisive. George W. Bush, and he was so proud of what and his crew what they had done in Germany with the reunification of Germany just before, and also the Desert War. So it was sort of we had done our foreign policy. They didn't they couldn't feel that they needed to do more, and they didn't see that this is an opportunity that might not come back for many decades. And the other was that there were people who were strictly against it within or around the administration. Most strikingly, Henry Kissinger was most interested in keeping Russia down outside of the administration. Brent Scowcroft did not believe in Yeltsin, no gentleman, according to him. He and Bush himself thought that Gorbachev was so much nicer. Why should they help Yeltsin? Yeltsin and Gaidar foolhardy did not try to come to Washington early on. And they were focusing on the domestic scene and thought it was irresponsible of them to go abroad. And the people who understood the best were Dick Cheney in Pentagon and Jim Baker at the State Department. But Baker did not push all over, and Cheney and his people, Paul Wolfowitz and Scotty Libby, were in a clear minority. I should also say the Secretary of Treasury at the time, Nick Brady, was against spending money.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I have a question from Emma. She wants to know, why did you leave the Russian government in 1994? Why didn't you stay longer?
Well, at the time, the big thing that had happened was that Viktor Chernomyrdin and like-minded people to him had come to government. Viktor Chernomyrdin, his big feat was to do a big insider privatization in Gazprom. So he privatized 5% of Gazprom to himself. This is one of the biggest insider privatizations that happened in Russia. And he had people around him with similar ambitions. First, Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Sokovets, now forgotten, who was very much the leader of a metal mafia, a person who was completely outside of the legal bounds. And these were the kind of people who dominated. There was one reformer left in government, that was Anatoly Chubais. Yegor Gaidar and Boris Fyodorov, who I had been working with, they had departed. Andrei Larionov, who was then advisor to Viktor Chernomyrdin, also departed. So then Jeffrey Sachs and I said, whom are we to work with? We have worked with Gaidar and Boris Fyodorov, and this is not for us to stay. Admittedly, Anatoly Chubais, whom I think very highly of the head of Russia's privatization, stayed on. And he's very much a fighter who thinks that he can accomplish things also when the situation is very difficult. But his reputation has suffered because he has stayed in such a company.
Thanks, Anders. I have a question from a gentleman named Rodney Caston. He'd like you to talk about the 1999 apartment bombings that led to a political shift resulting in Putin coming to power in Russia, and what were the long-term consequences of that?
Well, the long-term consequence is that Putin came to power and that Putin has consolidated power. We don't. What we do know is that the FSB was deeply involved in it, and there are several books about it. I think at least 3 substantial books. One by Yuri Felshchinsky and Alexander Litvinenko, one by David Thatcher, and one by name escapes me, at Hoover Institution, John So they are, and all argue that this was done by the FSB. The question is exactly how. If Putin himself, who had been head of FSB, had been involved, in all probability, yes. So that the apartment bombings seem to have been a very crude political provocation, and a very bloody one. If I remember rightly, about the 400 people were killed, and that helped Putin to come to power and engineer the second war in Chechnya, which was very bloody indeed. So it sort of set the stage for the Putin presidency, and over time it has become almost clearly. Yeah, Masha Gessen has written about it also quite well. So at least the critical people are in pretty much agreement that this was FSB, and the intention was to boost Putin, while some people hold back the judgment how much was really Putin. John Dunlop at Hoover Institution was the person sort of.
If you're just joining us now, we're with Dr. Anders Åslund, who's one of the leading authorities on the Russian economy. Please submit questions on Twitter and use the hashtag RussiaFactor. Anders, you have a lot of questions about Putin. I think you were probably expecting these. Kemal, a lawyer, asks you the following. What is the biggest income source of the oligarchs in Russia? And are the Russian people comfortable with Putin creating the oligarchy? Is there some kind of reaction from the Russian people?
Yeah, if we talk about the oligarchy today, we mean about 100 billionaires. And these the people fall into 4 different groups. One is these 4 Putin cronies, and we could add a few people there. Another is the state enterprise managers, who sit essentially on energy. Then the third group are people who are fronting for Putin, who are and that's a small group. And then we have a massive group of about 80 billionaires who are doing their own business and are paying commission or tribute to the Putin gang. So what I haven't mentioned here, for example, is retail trade and high-tech businessmen who are billionaires but are not really considered oligarchs. So the view in Russia is very negative, and it's the old traditional Russian view: the Tsar is good and the boyars are bad. And the boyars today are perceived to be the big businessmen around Putin. And how they make the money? The Putin group has tapped Gazprom on $10 to $15 billion a year since 2006. So this is, note it's billion, not million, that they have tapped the Gazprom on. So it's very much, they are making the money on state contracts from the big companies and from the state itself, building pipelines and building roads for far too high prices in exclusive contracts. And they're also making money on bank loans that are not being paid back, and the banks that are being collapsed. And they're making money on corporate trading, the theft of good private enterprises that are then being counted up all the time. And you wonder, how can private people make money in this situation? Well, because there's little competition. And Russia, after all, is a reasonably rich country.
Anders, a question from a gentleman named Jonathan Scriven. He says, are there any formerly Putin-aligned oligarchs who are showing signs of breaking from Putin and the Kremlin? If so, can they mount any real opposition?
It's easy to say that they can't mount any opposition. Talking to big Russian businessmen, you can say that in the beginning of the 2000s, when Putin had just come in, you could hear interesting, revealing stories. Now you don't. People are very, very cautious. The richer they get, because they do get richer, the more cautious they become. And it's very typical that they disappear one by one. They never gang up, because if you are a big businessman in Russia, you are very vulnerable. The law enforcement can immediately close down all your enterprises, and they often do. So if you look up on the big oligarchs that I mentioned before, Kosinski was kicked out immediately because Putin wanted his excellent MTV and media empire. Boris Berezovsky, who thought that he had made Putin soon afterwards, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, of course, with the confiscation of the Yukos oil company, and also Sergei Pugachev, who was considered to be Putin's banker from St. Petersburg, was forced out around 2010. So anybody who stands up in any way or is not considered sufficiently obedient gets kicked out. What Putin does not demand is economic efficiency. So the outstanding example is Alexei Miller, who has been chief executive of Gazprom since 2001. And he has destroyed a market capitalization of, I would argue, $300 billion. And Putin couldn't care less. This is a man who lets Putin and his friends get the money and doesn't pose any questions and take a fair amount of money himself. He has built a palace outside of Moscow called Millerhof in style of Peter Hof outside of St. Petersburg. And it's assessed at $300 to $400 million, while Putin's palace in Zelensky is considered to have cost $1 billion.
Anders, some more questions from Twitter. Who do you see replacing Putin eventually, and how much staying power do Putin's oligarchs have beyond his rule?
Putin has a personal authoritarian role. Such roles normally last as long as a person. Putin cannot retire. He has to stay in power until he's ousted or until he dies. Normally, such a system collapses after the ruler. There's no real ideology. Russian nationalism is just image making. There's no party and there's no family as yet. So the system will collapse with Putin, and Putin's oligarchs have no sustaining power on their own.
Great, thank you. Do you want to speculate on who do you see replacing Putin?
I see the system collapsing. So I think that the power will simply be lying in the street after Putin. I could say that the people who balance Putin to some extent now are in the Security Council. It's not the oligarchs, but it's the security establishment. And in the Security Council today, there are 13 people, 12 men and 1 woman, 6 generals, essentially KGB generals. So I think that if the generals in the Security Council gang up, then they can oust Putin. The Security Council meets approximately twice a month. It's not a regular meeting, but when Putin feels like having a meeting, and almost all of them attend every meeting. So never less than 10 people present almost. And this is the only collegial body that is meeting in the Kremlin today, always chaired by Putin. Otherwise, a meeting does not take place. So I think this is the real center of Russian power. And you don't see any analysis about it because we don't really know anything about it.
Anders, be really explicit. Why can't Putin retire?
Because he he thinks that he would end up in prison or worse if he retired. Putin is a very suspicious and paranoid person, which is a good quality if you are a dictator, because then you can protect yourself much better. So Yeltsin, who hadn't really done anything, he could retire with just a decree from Putin saying that nothing would happen to him and his family. And it was the family that was needed protection, not Yeltsin himself.
Great.
And,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hans Peter would like to know about the relationship between Ukrainian oligarchs and Russian oligarchs. He says, in Russia, the state controls the oligarchs. It has been said that the Ukrainian oligarchs control the state. There are, however, many links between the Ukrainian oligarchs and Russia, sentiment, family, and business. To what degree does Putin control the Ukrainian oligarchs or have links to Ukrainian oligarchs as well?
Yeah, interesting question. Ukraine is still an oligarchy. The big businessmen in Ukraine are very powerful. And Ukraine today is to a considerable extent like Russia in the 1990s, free and open and a very lively and interesting, but not necessarily very well-functioning society. But if you look upon the oligarchs, I asked Rinat Akhmetov, the richest oligarch in 2004, about his contacts with Russia. And he said, what do I have in Russia? I have only competition. I don't need that. All my factories here in Ukraine. After that, he bought some coal mines in Rostov. But it's a very strict division now between the Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs by and large. And then we have the big exception is Dmitry Firtash, the gas trader, who I really look upon a Russian agent rather than a businessman. He got a credit line from Gazprom Bank in 2010 of $11 billion, essentially to buy up much of Ukrainian chemical industry, which he did, and pretty much stalemated it. So Firtash is a Russian agent, and with regard to others, we have the old gas trader Viktor Medvedchuk, who's sanctioned by the US since March 2014. Who operates also like Putin's agent. So what I would argue is that the real businessmen in Ukraine are not very connected with Russia. And partly is that those who were have been sanctioned by the Russians. A typical example are Sergei Taruta of the Industrial Union of Donbass and Viktor Pinchuk of the Interpipe. They were subject to serious sanctions from July 2014 because they were too Western oriented. And these are just examples. So what we see today is really a sharp division plus a little group of Russian agents.
Professor Bharti from India says, thanks for an interesting discussion. How do you see the impact of U.S. sanctions under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act on Russian oligarchs and their companies?
This is a very interesting matter. It has divided the Russian elite. So what is happening now is that we have a small group of about 20 people who are being sanctioned. Among the big businessmen and state executives, and the rest. The rest are quietly withdrawing their assets from Russia as they can. They are normally forced to sell for what would be about half the price to state companies or Putin's cronies when they are leaving the country. And they can only do so if they behave very well and don't say a negative word about Putin or his regime. So since 2013, Putin has been pushing what he calls de-offshoreization, which effectively meant that the big businessmen should come back to Russia. But as so often is the case, it has meant the opposite, that the big businessmen are leaving Russia by and large, while a few people have been forced to come back. But my favorite example is Gennady Timchenko, who is a Finnish citizen, therefore not sanctioned by the European Union. He used to live in Geneva and in Colony, a beautiful spot on the Geneva lake in a mansion. And when he was sanctioned, he was forced to come back to Moscow, and has now to live in one of the old Politburo villas on the Sparrow Hills overlooking the Moscow River. And he thinks that this is very bad, and he can not use his Visa or MasterCard any longer, but has to use the Chinese Union Pay. So he's really suffering.
Anders, Amanda Rifkin has a really interesting question. She said, could you kindly address the role and influence of oligarchs in the U.S. politics at present, as there has been some rollback since 2017, but how much of this is simply not visible in the way that it once was, such as through Fort Ross in California or the sponsorship of things like Ken Burns' Vietnam documentary on PBS?
Well, I think that the big thing here is that one of the big Russian oligarchs, Len Blavatnik, is a US citizen, and he's a big donor in Republican politics. So he has provided a big campaign financing contribution to Mitch McConnell's leadership fund and to Lindsey Graham. Two prominent Republican senators have turned in that direction. And Blavatnik is the third biggest owner of Rusal. And Rusal has made a commitment of investment in Kentucky, Rand Paul's and Mitch McConnell's state, of $200 million. So this is perfectly legal, but it's big money. And Len Blavatnik is a close partner of Viktor Vekselberg, who was sanctioned on CAPSA in April 2017. So, and as the US system now functions, dark money can be freely used for campaign financing, and it's a question of tens of millions of dollars, and it can be much more. And we simply don't know where the money comes from. Clearly, some is Russian, some is probably Chinese, and probably some is Saudi, but we don't know.
If I'm not mistaken, though, he's not just giving money to Republican candidates. He's also been giving money to the Council on Foreign Relations and to other established outlets as well.
Sure. And in '96, Len Blavatnik and his family were big donors to Bill Clinton. So it's a question of being close to power.
Gotcha.
It's not a matter of supporting any particular cause, but I mean, in US politics, but in supporting Russia.
So that's a common theme, Anders. You talked about the malleability of Russian oligarchs. Two questions from John Sullivan. He says, do you agree with Bill Browder's account of what happened to Hermitage? And he says, also, is FDI a good idea or even a prudent idea given these circumstances? I think he's referring back to the 90s.
Well, foreign direct investment is good if you think that corporate governance and rule of law are developing. We thought so until 2002, and after that, it has not been a good idea. What is effectively happening now is that foreign investors are being forced out at a rather little return. The Russian economy has been pretty stagnant since 2009, with 1% average growth a year. You don't make much money in such an economy. So FDI, since after 2008, has been a bad idea. in Russia. And Bill Browder, by and large, I agree with Bill Browder. I strongly dislike that until he was ousted in November 2005, he was one of the biggest cheerleaders of Putin. So he, for example, attacked us. I was at the Carnegie Endowment then for taking money from Yukos. And which I was strongly in favor of, because I saw Yukos and Khodorkovsky then, as I do now, as people who stood for positive reforms in Russia, while Browder at that time supported Putin against Khodorkovsky and Yukos. But when he got into trouble, I think in Surgut and Gazprom, and I think that his book Red Notice is excellent, and I think that he has done so much. I no longer complain about what he did the years 2003 to 2005.
Great, thank you. Anders, you talked a little bit about what Russia might look like post-Putin, and you offered a grim assessment. Someone has typed a question and said, is it possible, though, that there could be a new opening, that there could be another chance for market forces in the future? What would that look like?
Yeah, I'm positive about the future. I mean, if Putin collapses, that's good. It's not bad. So I think that Russia will have a new chance at a substantial change, and that we can see a liberal opening. But there is a big a big but here, and that is the Russian ideology needs to change. Say that we have 10% today who are liberals in the European sense. It's not a small group, but it's certainly a small minority. And ordinary Russians need to realize that Putin has been standing for robbing the state. Yeah, I forgot to answer the question about how ordinary Russians look upon. Russians have looked upon it that this is oil and gas wealth, mineral wealth that they don't feel that it belongs to them. They don't feel that they are paying taxes for it. So therefore, there is a certain tolerance that the state misuses money. It's not perceived as being theirs, and people are in favor of ownership of a natural state ownership of a natural resources. I think that Russia belongs to Europe, and that Russia should come back in the early 1990s. 1/3 of Russians wanted Russia to become a member of the European Union. My late friend Boris Nemtsov always emphasized that, and I think that Russia is part of a very important part of European culture. So I think that's where Russia eventually will come. But I don't have a feeling that the Russian population is prepared for it as yet. It feels like the early 1980s or long before Gorbachev as yet in terms of ideology, when Russians thought that nothing can ever change in this land. And when I came to Moscow, my view was that this cannot possibly be sustainable. It was so obvious that Russia was a third world country with nuclear arms, as Zbigniew Brzezinski put it so appropriately in 1983. But today, the Russian economy looks pretty normal. Moscow has never been as clean and colorful and beautiful and wealthy as it is today. So the problems are not that obvious. Lots of things are terribly down, but the economic problems are, of course, not at all of that quality. The problem today is stagnation rather than shortages or financial collapse. Russia, it looks macroeconomically very stable today, but it is also quite stagnant. And now it will take a big beating during the financial and the coronavirus crisis.
Thank you so very much, Anders. There's a lot more questions. People want you to assess the strength of the opposition in Russia. There's more questions about Russia's history as well. So I think we're going to have to do this again. But thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. And thank you for training another generation of young Russia specialists. So thank you for joining the Atlantic Council, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Melida.
Bye-bye.